Let's get real for a second. You're sitting there thinking that going no contact will be the end of everything, that this person who pushed you away will finally forget you and move on. But let me tell you the truth, and I want you to hear this loud and clear. That avoidant person is not cheering when you disappear. In fact, they're hoping for something very different. Avoidants have built emotional walls so high they can't even see over them. They want connection, but they're terrified of it, and when you go no contact, it hits them in the one place they thought they had control: distance. They hope you're still thinking about them. They hope you're still waiting. And they hope, deep down, you'll break the silence first. You see, avoidants are wired to protect themselves from vulnerability, but your silence forces them to sit with their own discomfort, their own regrets, their own fear of loss. That silence becomes a mirror, and let me tell you, they don't like what they see. They hope no contact is just a phase, not a permanent goodbye. They hope you'll eventually reach out because then they don't have to face rejection. They hope you'll make it easy for them to reconnect without them having to do the hard emotional work. But here's where the power flips. You don't owe them that. Going no contact is not about manipulation. It's about healing. It's about boundaries. It's about finally saying, I matter too. So if you're wondering what avoidants hope for when you pull away, remember, they're not hoping you're gone forever. They're hoping they still have a hold on you emotionally. They're hoping you haven't changed, but you have. You're changing right now. You're growing. You're letting silence speak the truth that words never could. And if they ever do reach out, it won't be because you chased them. It'll be because your absence made more noise than your presence ever could. Avoidants often present a cool, detached exterior that makes it seem like they're unaffected by distance, silence, or separation. But the reality under the surface is very different. When you go no contact, especially after a relationship filled with emotional push-pull, it doesn't simply roll off their back. One of the things they silently hope for during that time is that you're still emotionally attached to them. They want to believe you're still checking their social media, thinking about them late at night, wondering if they miss you, too. Even if they're the ones who created the distance, they quietly hold on to the idea that your heart is still tethered to them. This hope is rooted in the very nature of their avoidant coping mechanism. Emotional intimacy makes them feel exposed, vulnerable, and out of control. So they create distance, not because they don't care, but because caring feels overwhelming. But when you finally go no contact, the game changes. They no longer get to gauge your presence through texts, calls, or subtle check-ins. The silence is absolute. That's when the internal questioning begins. Are they still there? Do they still care? Have they finally moved on? And those questions don't feel good. They bring anxiety, confusion, and the uncomfortable realization that they might not be in control anymore. Even though they act as if they're fine with you walking away, many avoidants secretly hope the door hasn't fully closed. They don't want to be completely forgotten or replaced. In fact, the idea that you might emotionally detach is something they find difficult to process. They hope that your silence isn't real closure but just a pause, a test maybe, that you'll eventually reach out and reestablish the emotional connection so they can feel safe again without having to initiate it themselves. Because avoidants typically fear being engulfed or controlled, they feel safest when the other person is doing the emotional work. So if you've always been the one to text first, to fix things, to understand them, they begin to expect that behavior from you. Even after you go no contact, there's a part of them that still hopes you're out there, still caring, still waiting for them to come around. This allows them to believe that they haven't truly lost you, even if they can't, or won't, take steps to reconnect. This is why the silence of no contact speaks volumes. It forces the avoidant to confront the possibility that your emotional attachment to them may be fading. That fear in turn creates an inner tug-of-war. They want the reassurance that you still care, but they don't want to be the one who has to ask for it. That conflict keeps them stuck, but still hoping that, even without proof, your heart is still somewhere nearby, waiting, just like before. When someone with an avoidant attachment style is faced with your silence after going no contact, it doesn't just go unnoticed. In fact, it can hit harder than they ever expected. Avoidants go to great lengths to avoid discomfort, emotional discomfort especially. That's why they keep people at arm's length. Vulnerability, closeness, emotional demands. These things feel threatening to them, so they create distance to maintain control. But when you suddenly remove yourself and go completely silent, it doesn't relieve them. It disrupts the very system they rely on to feel safe. Your absence introduces uncertainty. Before no contact, they could rely on your predictable presence. Even if things were strained, even if they were pushing you away, they still knew you were there texting, checking in, reaching out, trying to hold the connection together. That gave them a sense of stability, ironically, even while they resisted deeper emotional engagement. But when you stop reaching out, it shifts the entire emotional equation. Suddenly, they don't know what you're thinking or feeling. They don't know if you're still attached, if you're angry, or if you're simply moving on. And this ambiguity forces them to sit in the very discomfort they've spent their lives avoiding. The silence you give them is not just the absence of words, it's the presence of consequences. It reflects your boundary. It shows that something has changed and they no longer have access to your emotions the way they used to. That can trigger deep, buried fears of abandonment and unworthiness, feelings they may not even recognize consciously. For avoidants, vulnerability feels unsafe, so instead of admitting they miss you or acknowledging their feelings, they internalize the confusion. They overthink. They wonder what your silence means, but they don't know how to respond without risking exposure. This discomfort also brings up the possibility that their actions have pushed you away for good. And while avoidants often act indifferent or cold, that doesn't mean they are emotionally numb. They feel it's just buried under layers of self-protection. No contact makes them confront that buried part. It forces them to feel the weight of what they may have lost, and they don't have their usual tools to escape it, because the person they once used as emotional proof of being wanted you is no longer present. So while you're on your side thinking you're being forgotten, they're on theirs feeling the pressure of a silence they can't decode and didn't expect. They are uncomfortable, uncertain, and for once, unable to control the outcome. That tension builds, it brews internally, sometimes masked by distraction or denial, but it's there. They might not say it, they might not show it, but they feel it. And that internal discomfort is the first crack in the emotional armor. They've worked as avoidants are masters at keeping emotional distance. And one of the most important ways they protect themselves is by avoiding vulnerability at all costs. Reaching out to someone after a period of silence, especially someone they've pushed away or who has gone no contact, feels like walking straight into a fire for them. It requires them to risk being rejected, to possibly face criticism or emotional confrontation, and to expose feelings they've worked hard to suppress. That's why, even when they miss you, even when they think about you daily, they often won't make the first move. Instead, they sit back and quietly hope you will. They hope you'll break the silence first, not because they don't care, but because if you do, it allows them to maintain emotional safety. If you're the one to reach out, it reassures them that they still matter to you, that the connection isn't truly lost, and most importantly, that they don't have to face the fear of being vulnerable. Your reaching out serves as a buffer, a way for them to re-engage without having to do the emotional heavy lifting. They can then respond in a controlled, measured way, without ever having to admit to themselves or you that they were impacted by your absence. This isn't about ego in the traditional sense. It's about fear of being hurt, fear of getting close only to be let down, fear of needing someone who might not need them back. Reaching out first would mean confronting all of these fears head on, and for someone with an avoidant attachment style, that's terrifying. So instead, they hold on to the hope that you'll make it easier for them, that you'll be the one to unlock the door they helped close, that you'll make the first move so they don't have to risk their pride or sense of emotional control. In some cases, they might even test the waters by posting something vague online or liking a post to see if you'll take the bait. They might bring your name up in casual conversations with mutual friends, hoping it gets back to you. These are indirect ways of saying, "Are you still out there?" without actually having to say it. But a direct message, a phone call, an apology, that would mean cracking their emotional shell wide open. And unless they've done significant internal work, it's unlikely they'll take that leap without reassurance. That's why your silence is so powerful. It forces the avoidant to either sit with their discomfort or to step up and face their fear of rejection. It removes the emotional safety net they're used to. And if they truly want connection again, it requires them to move through that discomfort on their own. But until they get to that point, they'll hold on to the hope that you'll make the first move, because that feels safer, more predictable, and less emotionally exposing. Oh, hard to maintain. Avoidants thrive on control, especially emotional control. They're wired to maintain a certain level of distance that feels safe to them. In relationships, this means they often dictate how close things get, when conversations happen, how much they share, and how emotionally available they'll be. This control is how they manage their fears of intimacy, abandonment, or being overwhelmed. It's not necessarily a conscious manipulation. It's a deeply rooted defense mechanism. But when you go no contact, you upend that entire structure. Suddenly, they're not the ones managing the pace or tone of the relationship anymore. You are, and that shift is deeply unsettling for someone who's used to being in emotional control. The illusion they've built around having the upper hand starts to crumble. Before, they might have pushed you away knowing you'd return. They might have ignored your texts knowing you'd send another one. They counted on your consistency to keep their emotional world stable while they remained avoidant and emotionally withdrawn. But when you remove yourself completely, when you stop texting, calling, or showing signs that you're still emotionally invested, the power dynamic flips. Now, it's your silence that holds weight, and they don't know what to do with that. This lack of control begins to gnaw at them. They may not show it outwardly. They might look like they're fine, living their life unbothered, but inside, they're replaying moments, wondering if they went too far, if maybe this time they really lost you. The very thing they fear, being vulnerable without a guarantee of safety, is now staring them in the face. They no longer get to decide how this story ends, and that loss of emotional control stirs up anxiety they don't know how to process. The human brain craves predictability. For avoidance, predictability comes from keeping their emotional environment tightly managed. But your silence throws unpredictability into the mix. They don't know what you'll do next. They don't know if you'll ever reach out again. They don't know if you've finally moved on. And this uncertainty creates discomfort they aren't equipped to navigate. They may try to distract themselves, rationalize your absence, or tell themselves they never cared that much. But those are just strategies to reclaim a sense of control over a situation that feels increasingly out of their hands. They might also start subtly checking in through mutual friends, on social media, or even by sending you a short, vague message just to test the waters. These small gestures are their way of trying to regain some of that control without putting themselves in a fully vulnerable position. But those attempts aren't genuine reconnections. They're panic buttons being pressed in the face of losing control. Your no contact forces them to see that their emotional detachment doesn't guarantee safety or power. In fact, it can backfire. It can cost them someone who actually cared, and whether they admit it or not, deep down they know they're no longer the one pulling the strings. When you go no contact, especially after experiencing the emotional roller coaster of a relationship with an avoidant partner, it's easy to feel guilt or question your decision. You may wonder if it's too harsh, too final, or if it will only push them further away. But the truth is, going no contact isn't about punishment. It's about reclaiming your peace, creating space to heal, and setting a boundary that says, I will no longer participate in something that hurts me. It's not silence as a weapon. It's silence as a form of self-respect. Avoidants often don't realize how much they've taken from their partner emotionally until that supply is gone. When you're consistently the one reaching out, fixing misunderstandings, explaining your needs, or absorbing emotional rejection, it creates an imbalance. Over time, your nervous system becomes exhausted. Going no contact is a way to stop that bleeding. It's a conscious decision to stop giving access to someone who repeatedly showed they weren't ready to meet you halfway. This kind of boundary is powerful. It shifts the energy, and while the avoidant may be hoping you'll come back, hoping this silence is temporary, you begin to shift your focus inward. You start learning how to choose yourself. No contact gives you the room to feel your feelings without being gaslit or invalidated. It allows you to stop reacting to their emotional unavailability and start responding to your own emotional needs instead. And the avoidant notices this shift even if they don't say anything. They sense that something is different, not just that you're silent, but that your silence is solid. It's not a game, it's not a test. It's a boundary, and boundaries, especially from someone they expected to always be there, hit differently. It sends a message that you're no longer playing the role of emotional caretaker. You're no longer signing up to fix a relationship alone. You're not reaching for someone who keeps turning away. What they hoped for, your eventual return, your emotional chase, your continued availability, starts to fade the longer you remain silent and centered. And this creates a space of discomfort for them, not because you're trying to make them suffer, but because they're being forced to sit with the results of their own emotional avoidance. For once, they're feeling the consequence of their actions, not because you delivered it, but because you stepped away from it. In that space, you begin to see your own value more clearly. You realize that your peace, your growth, and your healing are not up for negotiation. The hope they had that you'd continue to prioritize their comfort over your own begins to crumble. And that's exactly what makes no contact such a necessary act, not one of cruelty, but one of clarity. You're not trying to hurt them, you're trying to protect yourself, and that's not selfish, that's healthy. In the end, going no contact with an avoidant isn't about getting a reaction. It's about choosing yourself, reclaiming your power, and honoring your emotional well-being. While they may silently hope you'll return, your silence is a declaration that you will no longer settle for emotional breadcrumbs. Thank you for listening, for showing up for yourself, and for having the courage to break cycles that no longer serve you. You deserve connection that's mutual, present, and real. And never forget that.